Welcome back to His Fire for Me. I'm Jesse, and this is my wife Kim. And today is Frugal Friday, where we're going to go through the book, The Art of Frugal Hedonism. If you've missed the previous two Fridays, go back and watch them as we start the book from the beginning and go through it. Otherwise, let's get started. Kim?
All right, we are on Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is titled Relish. Relish is a word worth musing upon. It can sound almost indecent with its suggestion of immoderate sensory intensity. Your authors regard this full engagement with the pleasure potential of life as the very finest skill in our frugality armory. We humans are ripe with nerve endings. Why waste them? Your author Annie remembers being a kid running around the bulk food store with her best friend, plunging arms into the giant bins of dry beans, and rating the different varieties for how fun they were for arm plunging. She seems to recall that the kidney beans won, and while it is possible that you might be asked to take your business elsewhere if you try this as an adult, it does serve to illustrate how thickly strewn our daily lives are with the sensual delights just begging to be noticed. If you're walking home on one of those scorched afternoons where the heat is shimmering and your muscles are all warm and loose, and the air is heavy with eucalyptus oils being baked out of the street trees, you might as well choose to enjoy all that sensory information coming at you like a molten sledgehammer. Sound challenging? Try this trick. Treat it as if you'd paid for the experience in all its sensory elements. Soak it up with relish and notice that you do not have to buy something to actively consume it. Smack your lips and make appreciative noises when you're eating something tasty. Half close your eyes when a sea breeze nips at the little hairs on the back of your neck. Stroke your dog's ear between thumb and forefinger and marvel at its silkiness. Snuggle into your bed on a cold night and actually grin about how good it is. Gaze at twinkly water until you feel a bit tipsy. Enjoy the rocking movement of the train. Go for a barefoot walk somewhere where you can curl your toes into brittle grass, mud, or sand. Listen to music while doing nothing else at all. Call it mindfulness, call it living in the moment, call it relishing. It's recommended by psychiatrists, hedonists, Buddhist monks, and cheapskates alike. What are some of the free or cheap things you're already relishing? Afternoon naps, singing, learning about colonial Australia's bushranger culture? Could you spend more time doing these things or give yourself more space to really engage with them? Conversation is surely one of life's greatest free relishables, and is certainly worth devoting time to. It, too, benefits from fuller engagement. People become more conversationally nimble and generous when they fully immerse themselves in the pleasure of talk. Help this happen simply by putting aside telephones and other devices of distraction. You might also like to question the dominance of the restaurant or bar as default catch-up venue. As the whining and dining budgets of many of our friends increased with age, your authors started suggesting alternatives to these spending obligatory social occasions, given that a single event could easily vaporize a quarter of our weekly income. We soon noticed that the conversations we had while walking along the creek or warming our hands around mugs of tea at a friend's kitchen table were generally more engrossing than the distracted consumption-accessorized conversations. A couple of people really can have a hell of a good time saying particular words in particular orders. BYO brain, no accessories required. It's easy to use spending money as mental confirmation that something of value is being obtained. We can equally choose to relish and recognize value in experiences, atmosphere, sensuality, or company. The more we make such choices, the less urge we have to treat ourselves by buying something nice when life feels hard. That urge might become transformed into a yen to go lie in the park on a blanket and watch clouds for an hour. And before you protest that such experiential pleasures take time that most modern humans don't have, let us remind you that time is exactly what you can choose to have more of when you spend less money. By the way, we're not inferring that you shouldn't relish your paid-for consumption. In fact, it will go much further if you do. Try ordering one espresso at a cafe and making it last for an hour. Revel in each drop of that oily black dynamite rolling around your taste buds. Have occasional sips of water to refresh the flavor. People watch while you luxuriantly observe the shifts in your brain chemistry as the caffeine moves in. You'll feel astounded to witness surrounding tables fill and empty as people hurriedly consume huge meals and multiple coffees, often leaving them unfinished as they pay up and move on, seemingly unmoved by the experience. Yet simply by milking the moment for all that it's worth, you get to leave feeling like you just had a seriously decadent experience. So then they give a story about one of the mindfulness sort of relishing things that Annie did at an airport, and I'll read that next. It might take a little practice. It's very, very easy to not relish when life feels like it's thundering ever onward at such a hurly-burly pace. Many people get completely out of habit. There was a captivating passage in an otherwise rubbish book Annie read while stuck in a provincial Indonesian port town. She couldn't leave the grounds of the tiny hotel next to the airstrip for 3 days because apparently, once the light plane she was waiting for finally made it through a gap in the inclement weather, it would want to take off again immediately. The book told of a pair of teenage sisters, one of whom had recently died and was hovering as an embittered ghost over her living sibling. She was seriously resenting her non-corporeal status and envying her sister for still having a body. In one part, she watches her sister walk down a gravel driveway and pines to feel those wet stones crunching underfoot. She swears to forgive everyone who sinned against her in life if only some higher power will give her a mouth for just a few minutes, so that she can pick up a handful of that wet gravel and roll it around on her tongue. She imagines tasting all the different minerals and feeling the sharp corners and the smooth facets of the gravel move against the roof of her mouth. She exults in the very thought of such sensory overload, then crashes into fury that it will never again be hers. This passage was just perfect for a lock-in. Annie had no trouble passing the final 2 days in and about that little room as she, yes, tasted gravel, investigated the sensory properties of a peanut for half an hour, and experimented with relishing the smell of the semi-rotten mangoes fallen from the tree outside her window. She also worked on her one-arm push-ups. Some mindfulness teachers suggest starting your journey to greater sensory engagement by simply pausing whatever you're doing for 5 minutes 3 times a day. Contemplate your surroundings and the feeling of being in your body with unhurried curiosity. Observe the contact of your feet on the ground and the feeling of your head resting atop your spinal column. Try and sense your heart and lungs in your chest expanding and contracting in that ceaselessly helpful way they have. Other practitioners prescribe an exercise with a raisin, where you focus on every detail of its appearance, texture, and smell for 2 minutes. Then spend another 2 minutes eating it. Your authors personally prefer a kumquat. There really is a lot going on with a kumquat.
Well, I could tell you that right now my sensories are on overload with these white pages of this book and this sunshine. I don't even know how you're reading those words because I can't keep my eyes open without squinting.
It's all the practice I've had sunbathing while reading.
Oh, I guess so.
There is one little sciencey part that they have as like a footnote on one of the pages. It says it was in response to put aside telephones and other devices of distraction that I mentioned earlier. It says, does this ring true? Apologies to pun-averse readers, to you. Well, there's evidence for it too. Researchers from the University of Essex put strangers into pairs to discuss meaningful topics. For half of the pairs, a mobile phone was left in the room, lying discreetly on a book on a nearby desk. Those in the room with the phone reported feeling radically less trust, empathy, and overall relationship quality. It wasn't their mobile phone, it wasn't even switched on, and yet it affected participants' sense of connectedness even if they didn't consciously notice the phone's existence. One hypothesis is that a phone subconsciously suggests the possibility for alternative social connections and thus causes us to participate less fully in the here and now.
What about, I think of this often too, when you think of movie theaters. So the etiquette in a movie theater is that you're not on your phone, you're not talking to each other. You know, the most noise that you should be making is maybe a little laughing out loud or chewing your food that you've consuming while in the theater, but you're expected to be quiet and focused on the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And yet often, I mean, I don't know that I know of a time where you can get that same experience even at home, even if you have a giant screen and your goal is to, be focused. It's so much easier, or I don't know, it's just
almost expected,
it's expected to be that way, and yet at home we want to grab our phone and maybe multitask, or if the movie's not quite as interesting, we'll switch our brains over and start doing something else. But if we're stuck in the theater where maybe we've paid for it or whatnot, we often won't get up and leave. We'll just sit there and watch the movie and then enjoy it that way. So I think that's another form of
I think that's an example of a situation that's specifically set up for folks to relish.
Yeah.
I mean, you're fully focused on the movie and what's happening in the movie. Maybe occasionally you're getting distracted if you have a particularly crunchy seatmate who's really snacking hard on the popcorn. But that particular environment is set up so perfectly so that the lighting and the sound and the cultural expectations are where you are meant to be focused and engaged. That's a great example.
I know that you've spent a lot of time trying to practice this relishing of the stuff that you're doing. So, what have been some areas in which you found that you find it easier to relish or harder to relish?
I have very specific morning practice that I've set up that sort of cues my mind into being mindful and being intentional. So with that first pour of coffee or tea in the morning and I add just a splash of cream and then I hold it in my hands and the steam is coming up from it and you can smell it and that first sip it's like a very intentional mindful practice that I have that makes me really relish my first morning cup of tea or coffee. And then there's a few other spots that I can really think of. Sometimes when I'm out on a trail with the dogs and I'm watching them run around, bounding through the bushes and sniffing all the sniffs and chasing each other, it's really something that I'm present in what I'm doing, watching them, and it brings me so much joy. And that's something that doesn't, cost any money to do, except for maybe a little gas money to get wherever we're going, unless we're here on a trail next door.
Do you feel like you actively have to try to focus on relishing it, or do you find that that's just what you're doing while you're doing it? You're recognizing that you're relishing that activity of them bounding through the woods and on the trails.
I think for me, I have to really practice and work at relishing and mindfulness. I have the kind of brain that's usually thinking about what I'm going to do next, or I'm planning for the rest of my day, or maybe I'm thinking about a conversation I had yesterday or dreams I had last night. And so it's the intentional practice of taking my brain and sort of quieting it and having it pay attention to the sensations of being fully present in what I'm doing currently. And so, yes, it's a practice. As I practice it, it does become easier, but it's definitely something that I have to practice and focus on. There's a few other things that I really relish. One of them is when I clean the sheets and I first get into bed with clean sheets. I love how that feels on my little toes and legs, that kind of cool cleanness of the bedding.
So how have you found, and I'm asking you all the questions because I know that you've been working on your relishing, but how have you found that has made you more frugal?
I think, again, it speaks to this transition from mindless consumption that our culture is so prevalent in. We often go through our days mindlessly consuming food, beverages, media, sights, sounds. Usually we're multitasking, like you said. We're doing several things at once and not really paying attention to the full experience of what we're doing. And so the act of practicing mindfulness or relishing is really grounding yourself in the moment and paying attention to what you're doing. So often you can have one beverage, like they said in the book, and really relish and enjoy it and savor the tastes rather than thoughtlessly consuming several.
Seems like maybe it also kind of slows you down so that you're not consuming as much stuff, but getting maybe even more joy out of the items you are consuming. If we take it back to that first, was it last week or the first week when we talked about their day and all the things that they consumed without even realizing they were doing it or getting joy out of consuming it? And, if they maybe were able to spend some more time relishing some of those items, they might have got some joy out of those items they purchased and maybe even purchased, a little less of them. I think we live in a very fast-paced culture of needing to get more done, more out of our days and whatnot. And I think financial independence is a goal to get to a spot where you don't feel like you're cramming every day full of stuff. And I know this episode's going a little long, but I think a good example of this is one of my favorite vacations we took, where we actually took 2 full weeks to go to New York for one of our anniversaries.
Mm-hmm.
And this is our first long vacation we've ever taken. Typically, they're either a long weekend or maybe a week max. I think we did a 7-day cruise, was the longest cruise we've done. But this was 2 full weeks. We didn't have a whole lot of money to spend, so we weren't looking to cram it full of stuff. And we were able just to kind of go out and do one thing every day and then go back to our room and kind of think about what we did, relax a little bit. And I think without realizing it, we were kind of relishing those individual days. And I still tell a lot of people about that trip and how I recommend they try and take longer trips, especially to a new place, so they can slow down and enjoy what they're doing and not try and use pictures later to remember back what maybe they enjoyed about the trip.
Yeah.
And then they just regret that they aren't doing it rather than getting to sit back and enjoy it. I mean, we'll have to talk more about this in a later episode, but we got so many deals on getting to go see plays and all sorts of stuff. I mean, we did so much stuff in New York in that 2 weeks. It was over the holiday week, so we got to go to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. We got to do the tree lighting, and those are the main reasons we went. But I think we got to do even more things than we even planned.
Yeah.
Because we weren't rushed and trying to cram it all in. So
yep.
I think that might be a good example of this relishing of things. So
absolutely.
And I think that's partly my goal of getting to financial independence and financial freedom, of not feeling like I've got to go spend 8, 10, 12 hours of my day thinking and focusing on work, and rather maybe I just focus on something that maybe does bring income, but is something that I enjoy doing, or and so that I'm not just spending it to make the money, but I'm spending it to enjoy it, and it also brings in some money. So yeah, so why don't you guys tell us some of the things that you relish, or some of the things you'd like to relish more, down in the comments below, and your thoughts on this concept of relishing things. And if you enjoyed this and you liked it, give us a like. And like I said in the beginning, if you've missed the first couple episodes, go back and listen to those as we kind of build a storyline around becoming more frugal and frugal hedonism. Do you have anything else to add?
Let's all practice relishing something today. Let's pick something and relish it.
All right, sounds good. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next Friday. Have a good week.